Today we welcome you to the Wake Up Call Planet Earth series, and I have the privilege to introduce the very first subject of today. It's called Mens Sano in Corpore Sano, healthy or sound mind in a sound body, in a healthy body. And I do have Mr. Lesley Bauer, which is the director of White Creek Wellness Center from United States. It's the location is in Tennessee, yes, Nashville. I'm close by Nashville, Tennessee. How many miles?
Knoxville, close by Knoxville.
Knoxville, okay. And he's visiting with us in Canada today, and he will deliver us the very first lecture. We will have a cycle with him. He will be here for next weekend as well, and he will have a chance to open a forum of discussion and conversation with some of us, with those who are interested and have additional questions as well. So I would gladly welcome Mr. Lesley Bauer, the director of White Creek Wellness Center. For the first delivery, we will have a break, and then we will continue with whatever will occur according to the schedule. Mr. Bauer.
Well, good morning. I hope to share with you this morning the relationship between the body and the mind, and how delicate of a relationship that is, and maybe our need to be concerned about some of the things we do in life, and how that will affect us, our body, our soul, and our mind. The first part of this video is going to show you the inventions through time that has been accomplished through the mind of man. Amazing things that man has done.
Each fails when compared to the very thing that gave them birth, the human brain. If ever ability was concealed by outward appearance, it is here, in this 3-pound mass of tissue, the size of a cantaloupe, the consistency of soft cheese. From this unlikely looking package flow our thoughts, actions, memories, and dreams. It has been called the most powerful and mysterious entity in the entire universe. But how does it work? What is its real potential? They are questions, the answers to which science is only beginning to uncover. Innovative techniques in brain research continually open new doors of discovery. Embedding a brain in plastic, then cutting it into thousands of paper-thin slices, reveals complex structures like these, each as unique and varied as fingerprints. No two brains are exactly alike. When photographs of these slices are traced and the data transferred to a computer, the brain's geography can be mapped to display something of its extraordinary dimensions. In the brain's wrinkled top layer, the cortex, the gifts of consciousness, sight, hearing, and movement all find their roots. Here too lie many of the qualities that separate man from all other creatures: creative thought, reason, the capacity for speech. Probing deeper into the brain's core, we find the basis for our feelings and emotions. Deeper still, the control centers for life's essential functions: breathing, heartbeat, blood pressure. It has been estimated that just one human brain is comprised of more connections, more circuitry, than the largest computer network on Earth. Or as Nobel Prize winner Dr. Roger Sperry once noted, inside our heads work forces within forces within forces, as in no other cubic half-foot in the universe. Within its deepest reaches, millions of tiny nerve cells work furiously, processing a barrage of information that poured in from the world around her. A continual stream of data, some important, some not, yet all part of a remarkable mental process that touches not only the performance of an Olympic athlete, but the moment. The foundations of this remarkable process lie deep within the brainstem. Every message sent by the body must first pass through a small, tightly bunched cluster of nerve cells. Here, the information is analyzed, sorted, evaluated, and filtered at a rate of more than 100 million messages a second. Only a few hundred of the most essential signals are allowed to pass through to the portions of the brain where the conscious experience is born. And of these, only a handful are actually acted upon. Throughout the day, this process continues unceasingly, enabling us to focus our attention even when the pressures and distractions of the world reach Olympic-sized proportions.
So 100 million messages a second. I don't know if anybody can figure that out for me. How many is that an hour? How many a day? And our brain has to filter all that information to what's important, what's not important, what should be kept in long-term memory, short-term memory. And yet this organ is very delicate. Here's a quote from someone of the 1800s, early 1900s. So some may think that the question of diet is not important enough to be included in the question of religion. But such make a great mistake. God's word declares that whether therefore you eat or drink or whatsoever you do, do all to the glory of God. The subject of temperance in all its bearings has an important place in the working out of our salvation. So temperance is something that we abstain or stop using anything that is harmful, and we use judiciously or with much thought, concern, those things that are good. So we can do harm with eating those things that we find out are harmful to us, and we could do harm by eating too much of the good things. So the Bible says in 2 Corinthians 10:5, casting down imaginations and every high thing that exalteth itself against the knowledge of God, and bringing into captivity every thought to the obedience of Christ. So this is the concern of God with us, because he knows how important the brain is to our relationship with him or to anyone else. The frontal lobe. The frontal lobe is the crown of the brain. The frontal lobe is where all deciding factors take place. And it happens to be the first part of the brain that is affected if we transgress in any ways. This is Phineas P. Cage. He is, or I should say was, a worker on the railroad in the 1800s. He happens to be the first known case of a lobotomy. And the lobotomy is where they go up through and sever the nerve between the frontal lobes. They used to do it with mental patients quite a bit. And it changes the character of that individual. So their thought was they could, if someone was schizophrenic or if someone was in mental disarray, they could sever that and give them a different character. Well, Phineas Cage here was, he was 25 years old. He is an excellent worker. He was a foreman on this railroad crew. He's a very loving father, nice family. He was a faithful husband, morally straight. He was a deacon in his church, and spiritually sound, and his character was very upright. He was a very honest man. He was true to his word. If he told you something, then he would fulfill it. He was true to his word. And that was until September 13th, 1848. And in September 13th, 1848, they were, part of his crew was to blow holes through rocks so that they could level out an area to put the train through, the train tracks. And so they would drill a hole, and then down in the hole they would pack gunpowder with a fuse, a line fuse with it. Then they would put sand on top, and then they would take this 13-pound, 3-foot-9-inch long, 1.25-inch steel rod, and they would pack that sand so it was tight. So then when the fuse blew, it would blow out and blow the rock out. Well, unfortunately for Mr. Cage, is that when he went to put in, for some reason he forgot to put the sand in. And so when he put the iron rod down in, it caused a spark and caused that gunpowder to blow, and it blew that steel rod up through his cheek and through the front of his head. It entered just below the cheekbone and passed behind the left eye and exited the top of the head a few inches past the hairline. So it went right up through the frontal lobe of the brain. So what was the consequence? Dr. John Martin Harlow, the young physician, was summoned to the scene, and through his ministrations, Phineas Cage was able to return to his home in Lebanon, Missouri, 10 weeks later. But he was never the same. He became impatient, irreverent, profane, obstinate, distracted, and never worked at the level of foreman again. In fact, for the next 2 years, he lost his job on the railroad because he became so obstinate and uncontrollable. He ended up went and worked for a traveling circus, and within 3 years, he died. But his character was so changed. It was so different than from what it was. From being the honest and religious and morally straight man to the profane and the ugly and the obstinate. Just the opposite because of the destruction of the frontal lobe. So the frontal lobe is the seat of judgment, reasoning, intellect, and will. Taken from several studies over the years. So anything that's going to affect the frontal lobe is going to affect the judgment, the reasoning power, and the intellect of the individual. This is a young teenage girl. I believe she was something like 13 when this car accident happened. And in the car accident, she had a head injury, which she damaged her frontal lobe. This was the result. It became impairment of moral principles, social impairment, loss of love for family, lack of foresight, incapable of abstract reasoning, cannot interpret proverbs, diminished ability for mathematical understanding, loss of empathy, and lack of restraint. Boasting, hostility, aggression. Now, does that sound too much different from a general teenager today? And yet this girl had a car accident that destroyed her frontal lobe. But this is the character of a lot of teenagers. So something is also impairing their reasoning and intellect. It says, sickness of the mind prevails everywhere. 9/10 of disease from which men suffer have their foundation here. Perhaps some living home trouble is like a canker eating to the very soul and weakness of the life force. 9/10 of the diseases from which men suffer have their foundations here. That's 90%. Do you know what a placebo is? A placebo is a fake pill. So if you go to the doctor and say, oh, I got a pain here, and he says, oh, I'll take this, and he gives you a sugar pill instead of a regular medication. That's called a placebo. Its effectiveness is from 80 to about 85% of the time. It's effective. Because 9/10 of most diseases have their foundation in the mind. Does it become real? Yes. But it can be reverted back by using something like a placebo. Many of the cases we have gotten over the last 5 years have been a lot to do with just people's mental ability. And we teach them simple ways of getting their feet back on the ground. Here is, this is the teenager. Temper, outbursts with frustrations, verbally and physically abusive in an abrupt, unpredictable, short-lived manner, sexually promiscuous from early teens, no sustained friendships, intermittent heavy user of alcohol and marijuana, impulsively attempted suicide twice. This is an accident of a baby that's frontal lobe was damaged at birth. So as the child developed, did not respond to parental discipline, always sought gratification of her own immediate needs, never developed adequate friendships, blamed her difficulties on others. Again, does that sound any different than a good portion of society right now? And the answer, of course, is no. So there are things we are doing, common things we are doing in our life that are affecting our character, that are affecting how we respond to society and to each other, and it seems to be affecting the frontal lobe. This is a left cerebral hemisphere of the human brain. There's a left to right side. And as you start in the left side here, then you see that is the frontal lobe. And then the brain is separated by what's called a veil. And that veil is a motor. The first part is motor nerves. It's actually an upside down man. So the nerves affecting the head start at the bottom and to the feet to the top. And the next is the sensory part. And then after the veil becomes the part where we can do our mathematics and so forth, then comes the visual area. And then down below, the cerebellum is our animal function. So that's where the heartbeat and breathing. No one can die by holding their breath. As soon as they faint, they start breathing because it's an automatic function. No one can overcome that part. So, when you look at this brain, if we were, for instance, to give someone some laughing gas, okay, you go to the dentist, and he's going to give you some anesthesia. It's called laughing gas. Let's say the nurse forgot to get your address. Well, as soon as you receive the laughing gas, the anesthesia, the nurse comes in and she says, oh, Mr. Bauer, I forgot to get your address. And I would probably turn to her and say, oh, you fat thing, what are you didn't you go to school? I'd be so abusive to this individual. And hopefully that's the opposite of my normal character. And because the first thing that the anesthesia is going to affect is the frontal lobe of the brain. Then if I were to try to get up and try to walk, I would stumble and fall, and because it's affecting now my motor area of the brain as it descends through the brain. Next, it would come to the sensory area, and I might laugh and laugh and laugh for nothing because the anesthesia is now into my sensory area. And then the next part of the brain is, if you've ever had it done, the dentist will ask you to count backwards, starting with 100. Okay? So 99, 98, 97, 96, 95. Okay, you have to think that backwards. You have to think to count backwards. So when you quit doing that, when you can't figure out what goes from 95 to 94, then he knows that the anesthesia is now in your parietal lobe. He now knows where the anesthesia is. And if it were to continue to give to you, then you would start to hallucinate. It would be in the visual area. And if it continued to give to you, you would die, because it would suppress your blood pressure, your breathing, and everything else. So he knows where that anesthesia is, and he wants to keep it there while they do whatever surgery they're going to do on you. Now, if I would take this same individual and I don't have a good night's sleep, okay? Maybe an hour's sleep. And I get up in the morning and I come to breakfast table. What's my wife going to say? So, how'd your night? Did you sleep well? Okay, it was all right. And she says, what's the matter? Didn't you sleep all right? Did you get up on the wrong side of the bed? You need to go back to bed? Because my character is going to be changed. If I continue to have poor sleep, then I'm going to start stumbling. I'm going to start hitting my shoulder when I walk through the door instead of walking straight through the door. I might pick a glass of water up and drop it. I'm starting to lose my motor control. If I continue not able to sleep, then somebody might say something to me and I'll laugh, and then I'll tell them, just don't mind me, I haven't had enough sleep. Because now it is affecting our sensory part. If it continues, it'll go into where we can't tell what 2 plus 2 is. We just can't figure it out. And if it goes further, we'll start to hallucinate. And if it goes further, we'll die. So these are things, just simple things, and they affect the brain the same way as medication affects the brain. So sleep is the only time the body can restore or repair itself. This is the third cycle of the body. There's 3 cycles in the body. Cleansing cycle, there's reparation, which is this cycle, and an assimilation cycle. So you have a cleansing cycle, an assimilation cycle, and then last a reparation or repairing cycle. This last cycle, the only time you can heal, the only time your body can restore is during sleep. There have been many studies, for instance, for stomach cancer or stomach ulcers. It's from people that are not getting sleep early in the evening. Their sleep pattern is after midnight going to bed. These people have a larger occurrence of stomach ulcers. So those hours from 9 o'clock to 12 o'clock are the most beneficial and the deepest sleep. This is governed by what's called the circadian rhythm. Now, there is something we produce during these hours to children. They produce the IGF growth factor 1, which their bodies will grow to. And then it's only produced during these hours in the evening. But we continue to produce that hormone as life goes on. And we no longer need it for growth, but we need it for stability. We are able to handle stress if we are getting these hours of sleep. And that's what that hormone does for us. So it's really important that we get those hours of sleep. So we don't wake up and our wives or our husbands are saying, you know, you need to go back to bed because your character is not what it should be. So, continue with a little bit with sleep. Vegetarians, animals sleep between 7 and 8 hours a day. Carnivorous animals sleep up to 20 hours a day. Where do you see the dog or cat? They're always sleeping. They might get up and run and play a little bit, but as soon as they're done, they're conked out, they're sleeping. So it's the vegetarian animals sleep what we sleep. So no one's a night owl. Those who work the graveyard shift live an average of 7 years less than their counterparts. So you take two people working the same job, the same amount of hours, and one will work the day shift, one will work the graveyard shift. That's a neat name, huh? Graveyard shift. And so, you know, 11 to 7, whatever the time is, 11 o'clock at night to 7 in the morning. That's the graveyard shift. They will live 7 years less than their counterpart that works today. So all these things affect us physically. We don't realize it, and the most damaging part is the fact that they really affect us morally also. So loss of 1 hour's sleep increased accident rate by 15%. This is a study actually done here in Canada. I think it was done on the East Coast. And what it was is they looked at accident rates, car accident rates, after daylight savings time. And they went up 15% from one day to the next. And it was all because of the loss of 1 hour's sleep. So sleep of a laboring man is sweet, Ecclesiastes 5:12. So go to bed early, tense, relax. You can take a warm, neutral bath. Catnip, hops, other herb teas are good. So melatonin. Melatonin is a wonderful substance. It enhances sleep. It helps with the aging and healing and repairing. It increases longevity. Fights cancer, immune enhancer, helps with stress, may lower cholesterol and blood pressure. So when do we produce it? What's that? Sleep, that's right. That's right. So here is a scale of melatonin production per age. And from basically 10 years old to 20 years old, we have almost a 60% loss of melatonin production after puberty. So, you know, children, what do they sleep all the time? I remember my little daughter, my oldest daughter, I remember when she was about 5 years old that I was putting her in a car and I hit her accidentally, of course, hit her head on the side of the door as I was putting her in the car, and she never woke up. You know, they have so much production of melatonin, they sleep like a baby. So, but as we age, you see the melatonin production goes down. So you find older people not sleeping much as we get older. I'll find out someday as I get older. But then, as you know, young people believe they can get away with anything. See, they can stay up most of the night. They can not follow the laws of health, and they sleep like babies. They wake up and they can go, and it's because they have all of this production. But there's a day coming that they'll have to pay for that. As you get older and your melatonin production goes down and your hormone production goes down, then you'll see on how much that has affected you. So this is the 24-hour cycle of melatonin production. And as you can see it, you know, during the day we have virtually no melatonin production. And it is associated with light and darkness, basically. As it gets dark, or nearer to dark, the more our melatonin production goes up. So we want to go to bed early because we have to get into the deep sleep, which is the REM sleep, the deepest sleep, to achieve the greatest amount of melatonin production. So if we don't go to bed, let's say we're going to bed at midnight, then we have delayed the process of the melatonin production, or our receiving it, because you remember, it's only during sleep the body can heal or restore. So if you're not asleep, you're not going to be accumulating this melatonin. So it's really important to go to bed early. Here's some of the things that affect melatonin production in us. Stress, caffeine, cuts melatonin production in half for 6 hours. Alcohol, up to 41% reduction, and tobacco. Then there's other things, smog, other things that affect it. Now when we look at the frontal lobe, we see that man has the largest percentage of frontal lobe than any of the other animals, and because God has given us reasoning power. The 4 brown drinks, do you know what they are? Coffee, Coca-Cola, tea. What was the other one? Chocolate. Chocolate has a substance called theobromine. It's in the same family as caffeine and all the other codeine and all the other poisons. And it affects the body in the same way. Maybe some people think they're doing fine because they don't drink coffee or some of the others, but actually chocolate is very addicting. It's as addicting or more addicting than coffee or tea. And all of these are associated with many problems. Methylxanthine is the general family name for these poisons. So here are some little things to considering. The following statistics apply to all 4 except where noted. First of all, there's more uric acid per cup of coffee than 1 cup of urine. So uric acid is the poison that we excrete out of our body, and that's where we get the name urine from. And there's more uric acid in 1 cup of coffee than 1 cup of urine. So what that is it causes terrible dehydration of the body, because the body still has to excrete or get rid of that poison. So you drank a cup of fluid, but you have to get rid of 2 cups of fluid to get rid of the poison you just drank. Now, what does that have to do with the brain? Well, it happens to be that the brain is the most hydrated part of the body. It's 85% water. So the body is going to, if it needs extra water, it's going to get it from where it's got the most. And it's going to get it from the brain. And headaches, confusion, not able to think clearly. These are some of the results of dehydration. Many headaches, many headaches we have taken care of just with a glass of water. So coffee is the 2nd largest commodity sold in the world. Oil is the first, 4.5 billion tons annually, metric tons. Coffee is the primary source of caffeine consumption. So besides caffeine, there are 100 other bad chemicals in coffee. So caffeine sneaks past the blood-brain barrier, causing abnormal thought patterns. So you have a protective barrier, a chemical barrier for your brain, and only a few chemicals are able to sneak past that barrier. And caffeine is one of them. There have been many terrible things that have happened in the world, people getting up in towers and shooting people and so forth, and most of those people have been on caffeine binges. So sugar and caffeine, and it gets to the point where those thoughts become terribly abnormal. So some side effects of caffeine is racing heart, bad balance, insomnia, disconnected thoughts, poor memory, fatigue, anxiety. So Your brain is going to be affected very quickly. Your emotion, your character, your frontal lobe is going to be affected very quickly with coffee, tea, and colas, and chocolate. Thank you. Just want to know if you were paying attention. So here's some of the results of caffeine also on other parts. Here causes higher blood flow rate and blood pressure while reducing the blood flow to the heart. That is like me asking you to run down the street a block and back, but I am going to tape your mouth shut. So you have to breathe only through your nose. So I would cause you to have more exertion, but you couldn't get as much oxygen as you need. So this is what happens to the heart. It's demanding more blood and blood pressure to other parts of the body, but restricting the blood that comes to the heart. It raises the free fatty acids in the bloodstream, the triglycerides, which also affects, makes you subject to a lot of things, a lot of diseases. Highest in food allergies encountered in medicine. PMS strongly increased with its use, and coffee causes dizziness, restlessness, depression, anxiety, hostility, circulatory problems, irritability, bladder and ovary cancer, birth defects, and peptic ulcers, to name a few. So 1 cup of coffee a day will cause a 1.4 loss of bone calcium per year, or 14% in 10 years for a woman over 50. So that is one of the causes of osteoporosis. Sugar. See if sugar affects the mind. Let me go back here. It says large amounts of sugar in the diet have been demonstrated to impair frontal lobe function in school-aged children. So how can we secure depression, nightmares, mental lapses, fatigue, and violent mood swings? This was a study done by a psychologist, Barbara Reed's research, and she found that we needed to omit from the diet sugary junk foods, coffee and its relatives, and refined carbohydrates. So what is a refined carbohydrate? Well, that would be any refined product. We usually find it in refined flour, so white flour instead of whole flour, white rice instead of brown rice. Anything that goes down the refining process becomes a refined carbohydrate. The fiber that are in the products allow the body to handle that product totally different than if you take the fiber out. The insulin, the blood sugar control, all kinds of things are affected by it. So here's an interesting study. It's called the Tidewater study. This is done in Virginia, USA, Tidewater, Virginia. And this is taken off of a book that was written in the 1970s called Diet Behavior. Let's see, Diet, I can't think of it right now. Diet, Behavior, and Crime. Yeah, that's it. Diet, Behavior, and Crime. And so they went into a juvenile violent crime prison. Okay, so we have teenagers that have committed murder and rape and crimes with guns and knives. It's a violent crime facility. And what they did is they went in and they took all of the junk foods out. Okay? So they went through all the vending machines, took the candy out, took Cokes out, took all junk food out. They were not allowed to get any packages from home. So no sugary cookies or candies or anything from home. And they went in and they put apples and bananas and whole foods for them to use as their snacks and so forth. And this was the result. There was an 82% reduction in assaults. There was a 77% reduction in thefts, 65% reduction in malicious horseplay, and a 55% reduction in refusal to obey orders. So sugar affects the character or the frontal lobe of the brain. as much as any other drug. Sugar is not a food. People look at white sugar as a food. It is not a food, it's a chemical. You cannot put food in the bloodstream. That would kill you. You can't put honey in there. You can't put herbal tea in there. You can't put anything in the bloodstream that is a food source. It has to go through the digestive system. Sugar can be put directly into the bloodstream. It is not a food. It is a chemical, a powerful chemical. And it affects the character or the mind of the individuals. You can see from these youths that were already associated with violent crime. Reduction of those substances changed their character enormously. 82% reduction in assaults, 77% reduction in thefts, 65% reduction in malicious horseplay, and 55% reduction in refusal to obey orders. Now, what would happen to our society if we went through and took all the junk food out? And just gave them fresh fruits, oranges, and bananas, and apples, and raisins. What a change in society that would take. So drugs damaging the frontal lobe. So illicit drugs, certain prescription drugs, other legal social drugs, alcohol, caffeine, nicotine. Drugs affecting the mind, asthma medications, which are steroids usually, blood pressure medications, beta blockers, calcium channel blockers, centrally acting agents, tranquilizers, sleeping pills, anti-ulcer pills, anti-inflammatory drugs, pain relievers, narcotics, cold and allergy medications. Unfortunately, our society is laden with medications now. Probably one of the major things we do in White Creek Wellness Center is we help people get off their medication. It doesn't take long. Remember that 90% of all disease comes from the mind. So if you look at the medications most people are taking, those medications give the same symptoms for which they are taking the medication for. So since that's the case, and since the case of most individuals is that their problem started in their mind, then the symptoms that they continue to have, thinking that it is what their problem was, and they're continuing to have it, is really their medication. And so we help individuals get off their medication, and when they're off their medication, their symptoms are gone. It's amazing. Blood pressure, seizures, all kinds of are things that are really causing a change in the body. So caffeine impairs the brain 8 ways. Produces dependence, causes drug withdrawal, causes worsened psychiatric illness, impairs physical and mental performance, interferes with sleep, threshold to other illnesses that can adversely affect frontal lobe, can cause spiritual and social impact, can cause toxicity and even death. So, what are the 4 sources of caffeine or its relative? What's one? Coffee. Another? Colas. Another? Chocolate and tea. Tea. Yeah. Even green tea, which is becoming very popular in the natural food world. Green tea has got as much caffeine as anything else in it. It's just green leaves instead of brown leaves from the same plant. So brain power, use it or lose it. Activities that strengthen the mind, studying the Bible, crossword puzzles. There was some very good research done on the activity of the brain, and they found that people that prayed and studied their Bible had the most active development of the brain. I was asked to go to Germany and help teach a school in Germany, and I was teaching them English, and 9 of the students knew no English. So I told them their goal was by the time the 3 months was over for them to pray in English, because they would have to use their mind to the most capability. And it worked. It worked. So activities that weaken the mind, such things as bingo, it kills the mind. Television, the worst thing that could be done is to sit and watch television. Television, huh? Do you know who this is? Monsieur Mesmer. Okay, Monsieur Mesmer. This is a depiction of a court case where he first performed hypnosis. We get the word mesmerized from Monsieur Mesmer. Where's at the end? Oh, he's out there. Okay. Mesmer developed hypnosis, and we are in. You are in a beta phase, hopefully right now. Your brain waves are in beta phase. That's a judgmental phase. You determine what is right, wrong, what is truth, what is should be done, should not be done. But hypnosis takes the individual and puts them into alpha phase. Okay, and alpha phase is still a conscious phase. The eyes are still open, the sensors are there, but you're not responding to them. Alpha phase is a deep daydream. You ever talk to somebody and you're talking to them and they're looking right at you, and finally you say, "Are you listening to me?" And they go, "What?
Are you with me?
Are you with me? What? What'd you say?" You know, they were looking. They're standing there, they're breathing, they're all awake, but their mind is in alpha phase. Did they hear what you said? Yes. They heard every word you said. But they made no judgment on it. So you can put an individual in an alpha phase and then tell them they're a chicken or they're something else, or tell them to answer the questions or to quit smoking or different things, and you give them the power of suggestion. So, learning is generally conceived as active, or shall we say beta phase, and purpose behavior involving motivation, practice, and achievement. Here, the authors focused on passive learning, on what is caught rather than taught, and on the process by which such learning may take place. Passive learning is typically effortless, responds to animated stimuli, amenable to artificial aid, to relaxation, and characterized by an absence of resistance to what is learned, thus opening up possibilities that, dependent on one's point of view, may welcome or deplore. This was a study done a long time ago. In fact, it was a study done researchers on television. And this became the basis for advertisement for television, because television is a physical monitor that within seconds your brain goes into alpha phase. So in alpha phase, you become a passive learner, not an active learner. So things are caught and not taught. So the brain can be influenced tremendously by the influence of television. There's been recently in the 70s an exceptional time period, because there was two places in the world. One was here in Canada. I think it was Nortel, Canada, here in Canada, and one place in Africa that had never had TV. And this was in the 1970s. Okay? And so they were able, knowing when the TV was going to go in, they were able to go in and gather all the statistics prior to TV coming in, and then checking those statistics a year later after TV had been there. And found the enormous amount of crime that went up, violence in 1-year-olds, or I should say first graders, violence in teenagers, and all the crime that went up, and just after TV came in. And the reason is because in front of the television you are not using the activity of the brain. You are receiving information without discerning whether it is good or bad. I think the third series of this lectures. Someone is going to be speaking about television and your children. So, for early education, there may be an opportunity to accept the fact that many children fidget in class, and that this interference with the attention is not to be blamed on parents, teachers, or the child. Mild drugging of these children or training in relaxation through alpha driving may be dramatically helpful to the educational achievement. Study was done in 1969 on TV. So what were they saying? Well, let's drug the kids or send them in front of a TV and teach them. So what do we have today? I don't know about Canada because I didn't look at the statistics for Canada. But in the United States, Ritalin is given in enormous amounts to children in school. Not for the purpose of necessarily educating them, but filling their minds with information and keeping them sitting still in the class. This is one of Monsieur Mesmer's achievements, a physically impossible thing, but once the mind is taken over, anything is possible. So here's shut them in rooms, and be these rooms ever so elegantly furnished, they will grow fretful and gloomy. Give them the blessing of outdoor life, thus their souls will be uplifted, relief will come to body and mind. Again, done in the late 1800s. So this is the environment we now put our children in to educate them. Will they be agitated and jumpy and fretful and gloomy? Yes, because it's in an artificial environment. We need to give them more fresh air and sunlight. Here's a psychiatrist at the National Institute of Mental Health says, we don't use Ritalin to improve academic performance, but get their behavior under control. Experts say it clearly works for about 70% of the ADHD children. But when one considers its side effects as well as the very real possibility of ultimate drug abuse, the wise procedure to seek the cause and treat them rather than the symptom. So Ritalin, I don't know if you know, but I grew up I graduated from high school in 1969, so I was in what they call the drug age. But Ritalin is speed. It's an amphetamine, and we're giving it to overactive kids, and it's just speeding the mind up a little bit to catch up with the fidgety of the body. And we're going to make drug addicts out of large amount of young children. So what is the cause? It says here, seek the cause rather than the symptom. So indeed there's concern among some, such as Bonnie Cramond, professor of educational psychology at the University of Georgia, who feel that many children are misdiagnosed when they are just highly creative, gifted, or bored. Especially because the great majority, as many as 13-to-1, are boys. We can hardly agree, for we believe that the typical situation or institution is not appropriate for children at such early ages. What are we doing? We're putting children in school very, very too young, especially boys. They need to be outside, they need to be working with their father someplace and building things and constructing things and climbing trees, and when they get a little older, put them in school. And they will catch up very quickly. But they don't belong in that artificial environment. 13-to-1 is the ratio of boys to girls receiving drug medication to suppress their activity. Though often very bright, boys do not mature as early as girls. They love to learn as long as they are not confined to a chair or with a desk, and at all the books and worksheets which usually are included. Research shows that both boys' and girls' brains and senses are still immature and not fully integrated until the ages of 8 to 10 and even later. What age are we putting children in school?
6.
I heard 6. 4 or 5? Yeah, we're putting them in pretty early. And that's not where they belong. Really not where they belong. This is showing just the activities of the two different hemispheres, the left side and right side hemisphere. And if you notice that on the left hemisphere, which is the blue, you have the left-handed control. Actually, that's the left hemisphere. And you have music, awareness, three-dimensional forms, art, experience, insight, spirituality, imagination. And on the other side, we have math and language and science and so forth. So spoken language. And what you have is a little girl uses both sides. She's born with using both sides of the brain. But the little boy is born using only that side of the brain. Left-handed control, music awareness, three-dimensional forms, art, insight, imagination. That is the side that a little boy uses primarily. And as he gets older, he starts to develop to use the other side also. So you can see that in history, where do we have the great musicians? Are they mostly women or men? And they're men. Art, men, right? Spiritual, men. Sculpture, and on. This is not a sexist thing. It's just that a little boy, if left to develop that side, will develop those first and develop them in a great form. Really, if you look in the Bible, God has said that little boys are supposed to be the spiritual leaders of the home. Okay? And that has changed in society. You go into churches now, and the majority of people in the churches are women. They are not men. Men have backed off, because I think we're training them to be more feminine in their nature. We're making them develop both sides of the brain, and they are imbalanced. So we become what we behold, 2 Corinthians 3:18, either good or bad. The law of the mind. I like this quote. It says, "You may not be what you think you are, but what you think you are." So you may not be what you think you are. You think yourself pretty good and so forth, but you are what you think. Generation X, 75% of adults and teens reject the concept of absolute moral truth. Over half the teenagers say that lying is something necessary. Young people today look at suicide as a viable option and a rational choice depending on circumstances. That's some poor thinking. Do you remember when the Twin Towers in New York were struck with the planes? And this is some results afterwards. This is Americans who said they became anxious and stressed after September 11th terrorist attacks. Some just from watching the collapse of the Twin Towers on television reported higher rates of heart disease up to 3 times later, researchers said. People who said they were actually stressed by the attacks were more than twice as likely to have high blood pressure 1 year after the attacks, more than 3 times as likely to have heart problems 2 years after the attacks. And according to the study reported in January's issue of the Journal Archives of General Psychology, the findings documented the physical consequences of stress, especially from watching upsetting events on television, said leading researcher Allison Holman of the University of California, Irvine. About 2/3 of participants watched the September 11th attacks on live TV. So TV has a powerful influence to the body. You see, the mind was only affected by sight, and it causes suppression in the body. One more area, music. So music directly represents the passions of the soul: gentleness, anger, courage, temperance, and their opposites and other qualities. Hence, when one listens to music that imitates a certain passion, he becomes imbued with the same passion. And if over a long time he habitually listens to the same kind of music that rouses ignoble passions his whole character will be shaped to an ignoble form. In short, if one listens to the wrong kind of music, he would become the wrong kind of person. But conversely, if he listens to the right kind of music, he will tend to become the right kind of person. And this was Aristotle. So, the way to maintain your brain. Recent breakthroughs in understanding how the brain works show that our brains can still develop as we mature, and that new brain cells are being created throughout our lives. The key to encouraging the growth is keeping the mind active. So here's some ways. Brain food. So new growth in brain cells and the connections between the cells, called dendrites, seem to be encouraged by learning, experience, and interaction with other people. Good social environment. And they shall see his face, and his name shall be in their foreheads. That's the frontal lobe.